Hello, everyone. Welcome. I see we still have numbers rising in the attendees, but we'll make a slow start, so you can all join at your leisure. Welcome. My name is Clark Boyd. I've been speaking to a few of you over webinars during this course, and thank you so much for all of your great questions that you've sent in. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Professor David Rogers. Hi, David.
Hi, Clark. Great to be here. Great to be here with so many of you. I see folks dialing in from Guatemala, Portugal, Cameroon, wonderful, Philippines, Columbus, Ohio, New Jersey, someone not far from me, and Singapore, Istanbul. Fantastic. Very global group as always, and great to be with you, Clark, and looking forward to our discussion. We got a great set of questions that submitted by so many different folks, and I know Clark had to sort of combine some of the similar ones and sort of pick out what were the most popular themes and sort of topics, but lots of exciting and fun stuff to discuss.
Yeah, exactly. So general housekeeping, I suppose, about this session. I'll be going through the questions from the list that you submitted. We got a really good breadth of questions this time, actually. Really enjoyed going through them all, so thanks very much for that. You can still submit questions via the Q&A here if anything has come up in the interim that you didn't get a chance to submit. We'll give priority to the ones that were submitted in advance, but I'll try and use a few of those throughout, and the ones we don't get to, you'll get an email response on those. So keep using the chat. We'll definitely have that open, and I'll be reading my way through all of that. But do use the Q&A box if it's more of a kind of formal question you would like me to ask. So, going to make a start, and yeah, rather suitably, we'll start broad, and then we'll narrow in a bit, and then we'll look ahead at the end of the session. So, question from KT Boren. And it's around digital mindset. I know I got a few questions on this, so I've combined a couple of points underneath this one. And the question is, so what are some tips in bringing a very traditional marketing team into the digital era? I find it's difficult getting team members to think digital when they're so focused on print and traditional media. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so interesting. We have, as you said, a range of questions. Some of them are a little more on the organizational side. How do you manage your team, talent, priorities? What do I do first if I can't afford everything? A few interesting, very practical questions like that, and like this one, and others that are more sort of strategic or maybe industry focused. So this point of view, I guess it depends a little bit sort of what industry you're in, where you are geographically. It depends. I mean, frankly, in some industries, some parts of the world, the response to this would be get a new team. I mean, why are you still paying these people to show up? But I don't want to be glib. It depends on what markets you're in and what industries you're in. Obviously, there's going to be a mix of different tools and channels that are most effective for your business. Many businesses find it's valuable for them, investors, is not to go all digital in terms of their channels, and you want to have people who have expertise in these areas. So how do you sort of find the right balance, I guess, is sort of the question. And how do you, if you have people who you say, look, they have a lot of, I still think they have value for our marketing team, but I want to move them more along more understanding or comfort or the mindset around digital. And basically, my advice would be a few basic steps. One is you do need to bring in some digital talent. So hire a new person or new people, again, depending on the size of the team you're talking about. If that's not even an option yet, start working with a digital agency. You can't just sort of tell them, well, figure it out. Right? That's not going to work. You got to bring in some people who are completely versed in, are really thinking in terms of these tools, in terms of mindset, in terms of the way you use data differently, in terms of the behaviors that people, consumers, customers are exhibiting. So you got to bring in that talent, hire digital, shall we say. Second, it's really important you want to sort of cross-mentor. So you need to get, and you need to actually structure this, create mechanisms, whether it's, lunchtime presentations or mentoring and cross-mentoring, or training sessions and so forth, where basically the people with the digital savvy are getting to do a crash course. An example, one of the digital transformation case studies I've been researching for my latest book is the New York Times, because Interestingly, they're seen today as a great example of sort of a very traditional old company that's really leading the way and very innovative. But the truth is, they started this process 20 years ago. They're a great case study of how long it can take to change, and like efforts that are not really focused on the right. It was years they were really sort of doing the wrong things. As they started to really see an impact, one of the things they did was they said, look, we can't fire our old, in this case, it's like our expert journalists who have deep knowledge of some subject and great connections and so forth, but they simply don't understand something like video. So they would they'd have little brown bag lunches, and the old, grizzled Washington reporters or whoever would come in and get like a 2-hour primer on like how to shoot video on your phone when next time you're talking to somebody in the halls of Parliament or Congress from some, young digital whippersnapper, and then vice versa. So create these sort of mechanisms and situations where you've got the digital people teaching your existing team what they know, and vice versa, because the new folks are going to have a lot to learn about your business, about what's been done in the past, about who your customers are, and so forth. Focus everybody on the marketing goals. You don't want you don't want things to be framed as sort of a debate or an argument between one channel or one approach or one tactic or another, right? It should be, what do we need to achieve as a business? What are the actual goals of marketing? And how do we get there best, right? Keeping everybody aligned on that, and that should cut across whatever their expertise. Second, or next, make everyone accountable, right? This can't just be, oh yeah, that's what we're trying to do. There's data now, and there's data in ways that didn't used to be for print advertising and out of home and TV and all these other channels too. So there's no excuse. There's no, well, this is what I've done, I'm just going to keep doing it because it's my process. Everybody needs to be looking for what's the data that we can put together. How do we measure? How do we test what is working and what's not? What's having more of an impact? Through that, you're going to be able to find that mix that works for you. And again, I'm not going to make an assumption, not knowing your business, where the traditional media, print and so forth, you're saying, are going to fit into that. They may very well have a significant role, but you're going to find out what the right mix is going to be through that data and through trying things. And then, you need to hold people accountable. Let people know, look, we're all focused on the goals. This is what seems to be the right, for now, mix of things we need to be doing. And everyone has to contribute to that. Now, that may be that you say, print is still a really valuable 20% of what we're doing, so we've got to have some people with print expertise. Terrific. But if print is 10% of what you should be doing, and half your team is print people, and after a year, none of them have built up their skills in other areas, then they're going to need to start sharpening their resume and looking for some other places to work, because you're going to say, we don't need that many of you. So, but if you have that transparency of what everyone is being held accountable, and you've got a time period and you give them the resources to train, what I find is in most cases, people are going to leap out. They're going to grow. They're going to expand their skills. They're going to evolve their mindset, because they're going to see, again, it's not digital for digital's sake. It's in the service of this business, which hopefully they've been proud to be a part of and contributing to for some time now. And they're going to, and when you frame it that way, I believe that most folks will come along and make that shift.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is in the way these things are framed, even the language that we use around them, around getting people to change, or that, they just don't understand. And that helps people to feel a little bit alienated and puts them on the back foot. They feel a bit defensive, and all of these skills and experiences that you're not making use of, and which are valuable in the digital age, they just are applied differently.
Absolutely.
So providing them the tools by letting them see how what they do can provide extra value to the business digital, it creates a completely different discussion. And I say this as someone who has very frequently just said they don't understand, we should fire them.
I just get it. Get rid of them.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
I've learned my lesson.
Yeah.
So we got a few, I think, really interesting questions around digital strategy frameworks this time around, and quite a lot related to the course material and applying those outwards. So Jorge Antonio Maron asked, if we were to visualize digital marketing strategy in a framework, where would it play? I often read about confusing strategy with plans, with strategic planning and objectives, mission, vision, and so on. They can become a little bit muddled. So where does digital marketing sit when shaping and creating business strategy? Is marketing a plan that serves strategy, or does marketing play a role in defining business strategy? Kind of eternal for you.
Yeah, so great question for an academic or an author. It's all sort of very abstract, and actually things kinds of questions I've been knocking around in my head for many years. So there are a few kind of related points in there. I'll share just a few thoughts. So first of all, what do we mean by strategy? And what I learned many years ago, and in fact still to be a very helpful starting point, is to think of strategy is about how you do something. Right? Often we'll say the business needs to get from A to B, or marketing outcomes need to get from A to B, or the political campaign needs to get from A to B. You have a goal. Whether you think about it as moving from maybe one positioning to another, or simply we need to achieve, we're starting from nothing and we need to achieve X, whatever that is. You have a goal. Strategy is not the goal. And strategy is not really the sort of what am I going to do next kind of steps. It's this idea of how do we get there. So it's sort of an art to it. It's like, what's our approach? And the idea is, if you think of a metaphor of a trip, starting from one location to another, there's different ways to go. And so you're not talking about, well, we're going to go 10 feet here and then to the left to 30 feet. You say, am I going to walk? Am I going to take a hang glider? Am I going to hitch a ride? I'm going to call a friend who's got a vehicle. What's my approach? So strategy is about the how. Planning is more, because you asked sort of how does this relate to plans and not mixing this up with strategic planning objectives. So strategy always relates to an objective. Planning is more when you start thinking about time, people, resources, sequence. You're getting into sort of actual steps. So it typically follows after you have a sort of a clarity of a strategy. How are we trying to get there? How are we trying to launch this brand? How are we trying to enter this marketplace, et cetera? And then when you have this approach in mind, how you're going to compete versus others, et cetera, all those would be sort of strategic questions. Then you start thinking about, okay, what happens in the next week? What happens in the next 30 days and so forth? And that's where planning gets in. Now, one additional point about just sort of understanding how these ideas relate to each other. Strategy needs to be differentiated. And this goes from everything that's been written about strategy, whether you think of sort of like classic approaches like Michael Porter, or thinking about, marketing positioning, which is certainly a form of marketing strategy. Differentiation is always critical. So you need something that is both an effective means to get you from here to there. But if somebody asks in a follow-up question, what if I'm one of 3 brands in the same market going after the same customers with almost identical products, right? So that's why you need to differentiate. Strategy has to be valuable and effective in getting you to your goal, but also has to be somehow, you don't want to be doing the exact same strategy as someone else. Mission and vision, when it's tossed in there, these, my instinct from the last 20 years is still to just sort of chuckle, because so many companies wasted so many days and dollars on retreats where they would go off to offsites and they'd come up with their corporate mission. And it was the same 5 words in just different orders. It was like global, excellence, customer, best in class, and so forth. Nowadays, I wouldn't sort of dismiss it quite as readily. I think companies have started to realize the fact is a lot of large companies didn't really have a particularly compelling sort of reason for being to inspire their employees other than we're a great company, you'll be proud to work here, and we'll give you a lifelong career. Now you don't have that lifelong career anymore. Companies are thinking more about, do we have a mission? Is there, in addition to serving our shareholders, is there also sort of an impact we're seeking to have in the world? There's a lot of actual more thoughtful and valuable work going on in companies thinking about a purpose to help define. This does not need to be differentiated. I just want to make that point out. There's not actually a problem if one organization says our fundamental goal is to empower women in this developing market through providing education to supporting the educational achievement of girls K through 12. And some other organization has the same mission. That's fine. Again, your strategies may be different. You may be focusing, particularly if you're for-profit businesses. But so that's a distinction, sort of where mission, vision fits. It's sort of a how we think about really more employees relating to your organization. Why are we all here in the big picture? Strategy is, we have a goal. What are we thinking about? And this may evolve over time. How do we get there? Planning is now the tactical steps. Now, taking this big picture language down to the level of marketing, which is the second half of Jorge's question, right? So where does digital marketing sit related to business strategy? Is marketing strategy and business strategy, is that the same? Is marketing a plan serving the business strategy? Does marketing play a role in defining it? Right? So here's two things that I strongly advise to companies. One is when I'm talking with marketers, I find it's very valuable as you're thinking about what you're going to do in your marketing. Try to define your strategy on two levels. I really say this for anyone, particularly anyone who's not the CEO of a company. One is the strategy that you are essentially, the strategy you are accountable for, and the other would be a strategy that you are supporting. So if you are in marketing, the first would be the marketing strategy. That's our marketing strategy, and that's what if you're developing marketing, leading marketing, running marketing, that's what you're responsible for. And the business strategy sits above that, but they have to be linked. So marketing strategy has to support business strategy. And I often suggest that marketers start that way. So they say, well, look, what are the business goals, which I cannot completely control myself, but which I'm supposed to be supporting? So our business in the next year or two is trying to enter a new geographic market, is trying to move from one channel to another, or diversify from, a certain kind of brick and mortar outlets to a mix of brick and mortar and online. Or we are trying to expand our portfolio. We have a strong brand with only a few products, and we're trying to, leverage that brand and to move into new related areas. These are areas which you are going to support, but you can't completely control. They have to do with product development. They have to do with the CFO. All kinds of other people are essential to that, right? But you start from that. You say, okay, this is the business strategy which I'm supporting. Now, in order to support that, if you say we are, changing channels, or we are trying to go after a new segment, all right, well, what does that mean in terms of marketing objectives? Am I trying to help us reach and develop an affinity and a relationship with a new segment of customers who hasn't discovered us? Am I needing to reposition our brand so that we're seen more relevant to a different audience, or to an audience that knows us well, still has high awareness, but no longer has as high an intent as they used to? Am I trying to support through marketing the penetration into a new geographic market? So defining the marketing objectives, which again are going to be about things like awareness, brand resonance, channel distribution relationships, potentially customer engagement, advocacy, all the things that really are more about that customer strategy, what marketers are responsible for. That's what's going to go in the marketing strategy, right? And so that's what I really recommend, thinking about the strategy that you're trying to achieve as a marketer in terms of the fundamentals that marketers always talk about, brand, customer, channel, price, so, bring out the old 4 Ps if you want. But then how does that relate to the overall sort of business strategy? What's the company trying to do? And that does a couple of things. One, it makes sure that you're grounded, that the marketing strategy you're developing is the right one for your company. Two, it makes it much easier for you to have those conversations with the other decision makers in the company who may be saying, yeah, why do you need so much money for this new marketing effort you're trying to do? You say, well, it's supporting this strategy, which you have said in the board meeting is the critical thing for the company this year. And that brings me to the last point, which was Jorge's last part of this question. Does marketing play a role in defining the business strategy? I would say ideally it should. Yes, absolutely. So by which I simply mean marketing should be a seat at the table. So when you have that business strategy, which is beyond marketing, is also about products and partnerships and acquisitions and joint ventures and all sorts of things that are sort of happening at a business level. Part of that conversation should be the voice of marketing. So the chief marketing officer or the equivalent of that absolutely should be one of the people in the room. And your real job, and I would say every day in and day out, the job of marketing as a function is to keep the company focused on the customer. So you should always bring into that conversation the most closest understanding of knowledge of who is the customer, what are the customer needs, where are we meeting them, where are we aligned now, where are we underperforming, where's the gap, where do the customer not is close to us as they should be, or our brand is not connecting with them. You have that customer-centric perspective, and that is going to be invaluable in as one of the voices in defining the overall strategy for the entire business. So that's how I see all these pieces coming together, again, sort of different levels and different voices. I hope that's helpful to Jorge's question.
Yeah, covers it off pretty well. And yeah, reminded me of my trauma of those retreats coming up with the 5 words.
Yeah.
And I had to go back and present to 500 people what we'd come up with. And
Yes.
I don't know why they chose me, because I was so embarrassed by what we'd come up with. And I said, strive for excellence. We really believe in striving for excellence.
Yes. Yeah. As opposed to all those companies that come back and say, we've decided to strive for mediocrity this year.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, it was terrible.
Yeah.
I'll remember. There was one that was really cringeworthy, but I'll remember. But,
okay.
so we actually got quite a lot of questions around the kind of 5 customer behavior strategies. I've seen a couple of points coming in. Thanks for submitting your questions on the Q&A. I'm answering a couple via text on there, but I'll bring a couple of them up later. I have seen them, do not worry. But a question from Fatma Ladgun says, I have some confusions in how and when we should use each of the 5 customer behavior strategies, because I found that each customer can have 2, 3, or even 4 behaviors at the same time. Besides, I also found that there are some little similarities between strategies, for example, engage, connect, access, and customize. So what's the first step before operating and communicating these actions? Should we identify each segment and establish one strategy? Can we use a mix of many strategies? Can we use the same approach in 2 or more different strategies?
Yeah, great question. So we've got these 5 behaviors we talk about, understanding how they're shaping customers. And we see a lot of examples of how to sort of leverage those. But it seems like some of them sort of, go together or bleed into each other. Or are they really separate? So what I would say is the goal of the framework is to get closer to understanding your customers' needs, motivations, and behaviors. These are 5 behaviors, and they cut across industries, and they cut across different technologies and different times. They very often appear in combination. So if the idea of access is something that makes it simpler, easier to get to one step closer to the things I'm looking for, on demand, self-service, that kind of experience. And engage is about content. Well, yes, those 2 might go together. I want to both have an easier, sort of an instant access, but I also want to have a particular kind of content that's really answers the question I need in the moment, right? So if you were, say, a consumer product that has a utilitarian function, it helps you fix a problem, repair something, I don't know, clean out the wine spill or something, solve some problem in people's lives, you might very well say, well, one of the things we're working on is a combination access engage. So we're going to create some how-to content. We find people want to not just be able to quickly sort of discover and find where's the solution to this problem, but I also need some information on how do I use it, how do I prevent this problem in the future. And so we're going to think about both creating, focusing on access in terms of which channels we're in and how do we make it as discoverable or easy as possible, and understanding how people's needs are shifting, whether they want to use traditional search or if they're going on Amazon or if they are doing voice search now or something like that. But also engage, when we show up, when they click on us, do they only want a click to buy, click to order, click to deliver, or are there certain questions they want to answer, and how do we create that right portfolio of content? So just an example, you're very often going to be taking maybe a couple of these behaviors, maybe relevant in even just one moment in the life of the customer, and you want to use them in combination. Doesn't mean they mean the same thing. It's not that access and engage are the same, but they work very closely together. Connect may also with engage, customize and may as well with either of those. So any of these can happen. Now, in terms of sort of the sequence, which was the other sort of way Fatima was coming at this, is sort of how do I get started? How do I think about this process? How do I sort of prioritize or make my decisions? So the approach that I recommend, and I talked about in one of the lectures in the class, is basically sort of 5 broad steps. And this is basically a classic sort of marketing strategy development process. And I've used it with companies in lots of different contexts. First is starting with the goals. So always, whatever, and you might be the head of marketing for a large company, you might be the junior marketing manager for one product in one particular geographic area. What's your goal? What's your thing you're trying to achieve? Right? Define the goal or goals that you're responsible for, the outcomes you're trying to achieve. Then, and again, these are your marketing goals. Then from that, think about who's the most relevant audience. So there was a question about sort of segments. Yes. So then I would say these 2 sort of go together, but I prefer to try to identify the goal first. That may embed it immediately. The whole goal may be win over more people in this segment. Okay, so then the segment is obvious. Sometimes the goal doesn't come with the segment explicitly, and then you sort of think about, well, if this is our most important goal, who do we think is among our customers, who do we want to focus on the most? So think about the customer and the brand. That's sort of the second stage. So who am I trying to reach, and what is my brand? How does my brand relate to them and to this objective or this goal or this problem, right? Then I would, stage 3, start thinking about actual strategic strategies and ideas. So this is where the 5 behaviors would come in. And again, so you say, at the beginning you said, well, we're not, people don't realize when they have this problem that they could order our product, or they don't know how to use it. So we want to solve that's our problem. Who's the key segment? Well, who are the types of customers who have this issue and can afford our product and so forth? What's our brand? Are we stressing on cleanliness or functionality or ease or aesthetics and so forth? So and now you're ready to start thinking about, okay, is this about creating a different mobile experience? Is this about creating a bunch of short explainer videos? Now, this is the actual strategy, sort of ideation, coming up with different ideas, and then stepping back and probably doing a sort of prioritization among those ideas. So that's strategy development. And then the last sort of 2 steps as you get ready to execute would be, resources and planning. So here's where that planning comes in. Okay, we think this is the right approach. What do we need? Wow, we need a videographer. We need, footage that's going to work on Instagram. We need blah, blah, blah. So what are the things we've got to get done to try the strategy out? And then metrics. And that's the last point. How are we going to measure this? What kind of data? Typically, you want to, if possible, get some baseline data. So what's our data currently? What's the numbers that are going to let us know if this strategy is working, right? So that's sort of defining the metrics, and then saying, well, can we, do we have some sort of baseline numbers? See where are we performing now, so that then as we try this, we can see, data is always going to be limited. It's never going to give you the whole picture. But as long as you link it to the goals, you say, well, the ultimate thing I'm trying to do is get more men at home, age 20 to 30, who are watching television and spill their light beer on their shorts, whatever, this is the scenario, to discover our solution for this, whatever the thing is. Define the goal. Then you've got some metrics. Then you can say, okay, I know what I'm trying to measure. So linking the metrics to the goal, gathering the data where you are now, and then you can try strategy 1 and see if it makes a difference, right? If not, go back to one of the other strategies that came out of your ideation step. Try another one. So that's sort of the sequence I would take. And again, if you're starting from the goals and then from that understanding the segment and the brand, I think when you get to the strategy development, you'll have a pretty clear instincts of, do we think this issue is more about customized? Do we think it's creating more customized, personalized offerings? Do we think it's more about getting the customer to collaborate with us? Are we trying to drive more advocacy and communication, which gives more of a connect strategy? It'll give you a sense of sort of which of these to draw on. Again, the whole point of the framework is just to help you get close to customer needs and think effectively and creatively about what you might do. So it's a way of generating specific strategic concepts, I would call them, ideas. So let's shoot a video, let's create a chat interaction tool, a chat bot, let's, any of these ideas, and making sure that they're coming from the customer's needs and not from the technology, and not from, well, somebody's trying to sell me this, or not from, well, this is what we've done for the last, 10 years with our company. Well, if you're trying to change your company, maybe you don't want to keep using the same tactics. That's the goal of focusing on the customer behaviors.
Excellent. Yeah, I field that question sometimes, but I don't think quite so effectively. Yeah, that's very helpful. And we have one that follows on from that. Maybe it's a bit of a shorter answer because we've tackled some of these points just there. But wanted to bring it up because this question it does come up every so often during these courses from Matthias Julian, and it said, well, so far been focused on these 5 consumer behaviors and how we should tackle consumers. Yeah, sure. Perhaps use that verb, but in each of these stages. But I haven't seen anything related to the consumer journey. So that journey should be different in each behavior. So at the engage stage, during morning, lunch, at the office, at night, will be different to someone in the collaboration stage. So how can we understand and learn about the customer journey in each of these stages, for example, engage and collaboration at once?
Yeah.
And how can we tackle them in different stages? Can we use the same strategy and resources for every behavior? So a little bit of what we just touched on, but there's something else in there, I think.
So just to reiterate from the previous question, the 5 behaviors, I wouldn't really think of them as stages. It's not sequential. It's not that you first need access for the customer, and then you need to engage them, and then you need to customize. It's really more about customer. It's a behavioral model. I'm sorry. It's about behavioral model and sort of psychologically based. What are the sort of motivations that are going to drive them to act or connect them to your business. Customer journey mapping is a popular tool. It's a very good model. I definitely have used it with some companies. Sometimes, if anything, it's a little too popular. A lot of people just think, well, we got to start with a customer journey map, and they're not sure why they're using that tool. Any tool, it's very important to ask yourself first, why are we using this? What's the outcome we're trying to get to? So customer journey mapping is a more sort of an actual behavioral map in terms of sequences of steps and what things people are doing. So it's different from something like a customer, like a marketing funnel, which is more about psychology. This is about you do this and then you do this. So stages is exactly, I think, a perfect analogy or a word to use talking about customer journey maps. Another example would be Google has done some great research talking about customer moments. So trying to figure out sort of the key moments in the day and experience in the life of the customer where there's sort of a moment of need or discovery or something, and how you can be relevant as a marketer there. But let's stick with the customer journey map. It is not typically stages, as I think a great way of thinking about it. I wouldn't think of it as time of day, because you don't know, especially now on our mobile devices, we could be doing anything at any time of the day while we're anywhere. Typically, it's more about the process, the product or the service that sort of has an intrinsic kind of series of stages. My colleague, Ray McGrath, talks about defining sort of the consumption model of your product or service. An analogy, one example that's, I've seen from a customer journey map done by a former student of mine was around, train travel as an example. And so for that category, you would say, well, the main sort of stages are planning. So thinking about a trip, right? Oh, where am I going? Where do I think I'm going to go? Then there's a somewhat different stage, and these can bleed into each other, but they're sort of different. They're sort of planning the trip, and they're shopping, looking for tickets. Okay, well, what's the price? Where do I start from? Where do I end? And so forth, right? And purchasing one. So there's that shopping stage. Then there's a stage that they call post-booking pre-travel, right? So typically you buy the ticket before you're at the airport or at the train station or whatever. So there's some period of time there. Now, maybe not a lot happens there, but some things could happen or do happen. Then there's the actual trip itself, the travel experience. This is where the product is being consumed, so to speak. And then there's the post-travel experience. So you get back, is there anything you do after the fact that might relate to or have stemmed from that experience? Now, it's useful to think about what those stages are for you, because typically businesses, particularly when they're not as customer-centric as they could, sort of thinking about what they do, tend to focus much more on one or two of those. So classically, marketers, they focus on the sale, and if they focus on anything else, they're focusing on product usage, which is important. But they would only be thinking about, the ticket shopping stage and the travel experience itself, rather than also thinking about, well, what happens in the planning before you decide to start shopping for tickets? Is there some way we can be relevant to the customer there? What happens between the buying of the ticket and the getting on the train, right? Is there something happening in the life of the customer there where we could be relevant? Or do they ever have questions for us? What about post-travel? What could follow up? So using that, this is where I find the customer journey map is useful. Again, what are we using it for? Two most common, and I find sort of valuable ways of using this framework, is to analyze the current customer's experience. So just to understand the current customer experience, particularly, this is sort of figuring out pain points, problems, things that are annoying, things that are cumbersome, slow, awkward, and so forth. And this can be a good way of guiding your market research and discovering, guess what? Our shopping tool is really terrific, but when people get on the train, they have trouble finding the ticket. Our app is showing your own your boarding pass is like 7 clicks through, and people find that really annoying or something like that. So it helps you sort of identify where things are better or worse in the current state. The other way of doing it is ideating how can you create a better experience. So thinking about, here's the current experience. What could we do to go beyond, to differentiate, to delight, to create something really impactful for the customer, again, in service of our goals. So maybe we want to drive more customer advocacy. We want people to not just have a great time on our trip, but to tell others about it. All right, well, think about it. Each of these stages, is there something you could do to create, enhance the experience in a way that might stimulate that advocacy? So now we're in a position to think about, how does this relate to the 5 behaviors framework? In general, I would say if you're doing a customer journey map, do both of them in parallel. So figure out those stages, think about the experience, what you might do, then think about, okay, what are our objectives for this customer? How might we achieve them through improving the access, creating more engaging content, through customizing and personalizing the experience, through helping them connect with us or others, or creating a context for them to collaborate with us. And then put the two together. So what'll typically happen is you may go back to these stages now, and when you say, well, what can we do at stage 2 to enhance the experience, or to, again, achieve our goal, create more customer advocacy, now those behavioral levers start to have a very specific context. So what you may very well find is you say, you know what, stage 1, we're having a problem and it's all about access. Stage 2 is fine, people are perfectly satisfied, but we think we could delight them by engaging them with some really amazing content. Stage 3, we think is actually the place where we could collaborate with people, and they're open to interacting with us or something. So you'll figure out one or more of these strategies might be what you want to tap into, one or more of these customer behaviors at the different stages of their journey. So that's how I see, again, the behaviors are not so much time-based or linear. It's about customer motivations and needs. Customer journey mapping, when it's done well, or micro moments when it's done well, is about the sort of sequence of what happens, what's the progression they go through. So put together, each one can sort of enrich the other.
Great. Yes. Thank you. I think you're talking about those customer journey maps. I was thinking about how much of a comforting illusion they can really be. I think when you lose sight of the purpose of them and the benefit that they're trying to bring, and I think if you use those customer behaviors as a kind of a reference and a way of adding a bit of an extra dimension to that, it brings you back to the focus of what you're actually trying to achieve and who you're actually trying to communicate with. Because the customer journey can look really fantastic. People can get the whiteboard out and draw all of these things and show all of these dots and people moving all over the place. But people don't move in that linear way. I don't go from no, I'm in the I want to go phase. So I will use a shopping comparison site. So I think it actually keeps you focused on that customer-centric approach. This week's newsletter is about Google Travel, in fact. So I'll be.
Well, and I think to your point, Clark, that's one of the, I guess, sort of biggest misuses or sort of a customer journey map I've seen, and I think it's not that uncommon, is I see the managers, the marketers drawing this whole journey of the customer. And what they're really drawing is their ideal sequence of behaviors that they wish the customer would do if they could sort of hypnotize them. It's like, well, before the customer drives to the mall, first they open our app. That's the first step in their journey, and they plan out where they want to go. And when they arrive at the mall, they give us some data by clicking on this button. No, this is not a wish fulfillment, tool of like, let me chart what the perfect customer should do that would maximize my income. It's supposed to be a tool to sort of understand what is the customer doing already, and like how, where are we falling short, or where could we add more value. So what's the purpose before you start drawing? You spend the whole day drawing really fun things on the whiteboard.
Well, I've seen some that look absolutely fantastic, but and I've enjoyed the meetings, but I'm not sure what happened after. So we've got a few. Always our most oversubscribed section here. We've got four examples here. Digital strategy for specific industries. So people wanted to know what's going on in these different areas. Oh, an interesting one here to begin, actually, from Jairo Andres Olarte Castillo. Apologies for butchering the name, but I tried. In Colombia, my industry is beverages, and I aim to position a new brand. So can you talk about examples of how the dynamics of digital marketing strategies are used in that industry, and how to apply the different topics seen in the course? So really what we've just been discussing, but thoughts on a beverage brand and a new one?
Yeah. So beverage brands, great example of exactly the process we're talking about. So again, I'd start with a goal. Are you trying to drive, are you trying to change the positioning? Are you trying to be more relevant? In this case, it sounds like you've got a new offering. You're entering the market. So presumably product trial is one of the things. I mean, hopefully you believe you've got a product that people haven't tried, but once they do, they'll be interested in repeat purchase. So, that's a common goal for new entry of a consumer packaged good. Specific segment, you may think that we think this segment is A, the best fit based on early market research, or B is going to help bring along other people, or C, maybe they're just more likely, they're more amenable, they're curious, and they like to try something new. So it's going to be easier to get them to try something they've never heard of. But anyway, so you define your goals, right? Again, new beverage, new to market, it's probably primarily something about product trial and going after certain specific segments and sort of getting their interest, bringing the brand and the value proposition, or that sort of unique selling proposition, so to speak, to them. So define the goal and figuring out who you're trying to reach. Again, particularly at the beginning, don't try to go after everybody. This is a really important, just sort of bedrock marketing principle, which I can't stress enough, so I'll just take a moment for this. Common mistake: do not try to go after everyone. And particularly, the earlier you are in the business, the more impact you'll have starting with a narrow focus. I see this in a lot of businesses. If anything, it's even truer in some of the new digital-only business models, platform business models. I was reading a case study just recently on, one of the topics I teach on in my other class on Emeritus is about platform business models, whether it's Facebook or an Airbnb or an Uber or something where you think of Uber or Lyft or Didi or any of these. You need drivers and riders, right? Airbnb, you need hosts and travelers. So this is another category. It's marketplace for used cars. And there have been a few startups, but the case study I read was on BP, which was one of the first ones going into this. And they recognized a latent need and opportunity in the market, and they were pretty well focused on the customers. The biggest mistake I saw in looking in their case was they tried to go after too many people too fast, right? They tried, and basically they got caught up in the sort of, in this case as a startup, the sort of funders, Silicon Valley venture capital. The more money you get, the more money you have to raise. The more money to raise more money, you have to look bigger and bigger. And so they thought that meant that what they had to do was expand into new markets, right? They're just getting started, and they're like, well, we're in this state, we've got to add more states and more cities and keep getting bigger and bigger. And it killed them. They just ran out of money and they had to shut down, even though, they had shown people liked the offer, and they weren't getting enough penetration. Whereas you see the companies like this that are succeeding, and I mean back to, how did eBay get started, and PayPal, and some of these, they started with very narrowly defined customer segments. They went for what's classically called the early adopters. And for any given brand or product or service, it's going to be different. But you've got to figure out who are the people who need your solution the most, or who are going to be most appealed to by your brand, by your unique offering. So who is that? As narrow as you can. And even if you say, ultimately, I'm going to be a broad-based consumer brand, this is not about a niche brand, that's fine. You still want to say, who's going to start first? Who I think is the ripest target to get, who would be most willing to try this when they never heard of it, when it's too expensive, when it doesn't have all the features, whatever, you always have these sort of liabilities as a new brand. And really start there and delay as much as you can expanding that. See if you can get real penetration. And this is, again, the mistake BP made. Even in their home market of California, they got enough customers to give them good feedback to figure out how to improve the customer experience, but they didn't have enough people selling cars, right? They just weren't getting that many sellers on. Well, you can't run a marketplace without getting enough sellers and buyers. And so they never had a big enough selection, and didn't matter what they did with the customer experience, they were never going to sell that many cars if people went on and there just weren't that many choices to choose from. And so they never solved that fundamental problem, and they grew and grew, and they ran out of cash. Same thing with your new coverage. Figure out who these people are. And then again, so you've got the goal, you've got a narrowly defined segment, and then think about these behaviors. What's your brand? What do you think the brand is going to speak to them, and how? And then think about, okay, do we create content that's going to bring this alive to them in an amazing way and something compelling and differentiating? That would be an engaged strategy. Do we have a new channel, a different way to buy this, or reach them, go to where this customer segment is, bring it right up to them, make it super easy to try, and that's how we drive product trial. A lot of consumer goods do that. Go guerrilla and bring the product to the customer. That's an access strategy. Do we think we have some kind of a social media? We're going to use influencers, and we're going to do a connect strategy. So you're going to look at each of these and think about the different ones, and again, how you might combine them. But again, I would start with being really clear on the marketing goals for in this case, launching the beverage, and be very clear on who the segment is they're trying to reach first.
Excellent. Well, our next one, an area that I know you're passionate about, got a music one. Mark Bonifacio, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, says, I'm a marketing consultant with concentration on music marketing. How do you think the music industry will evolve now that CDs are gone and it's gone pretty digital with streaming and subscription, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, etc.? What is the future of the customer network strategy for music?
Yeah, music is dear to my heart. I was actually, I was my career for my first 20 years. I mean, overlapping with my business career, but my undergraduate degree was actually in music. So I was a musician and a composer. And my first entrance into business was right out of college, starting a record label. And that was how I started learning about brands and marketing and business and all these things. And it led to many other things along the way. But so deep affection for the industry has gone through tremendous change, and it's continuing to change. There's a few sort of big players at this point: Spotify and Apple Music, and YouTube, of course, and then these sort of little players, as you mentioned, Deezer, Tidal, etc. I think, to me, what is the future of customer network strategy for music? For the artists and the labels, for the people who are, so you have the platforms, which are a little different, the Apple Music, the Spotify, and so forth. But for the artists and for the labels who are, aggregating and, selling them and packaging them, it is all about, the challenge is all about discovery and sharing, right? So how do you reach these customers? And it is not at all, this is completely an industry that is really not, I mean, if you're talking about, I don't know, it has moved so far, so dramatically from the traditional outbound broadcast pay and spray kind of approach to marketing, big ad campaigns to announce the new album by so-and-so. I was about to say, well, the small players don't do that anymore, only if you're the big, Jay-Z or Taylor Swift or Beyonce. These people are now releasing albums with no advance warning. Like, they're using a pure PR kind of strategy where, they drop their new album, like, nobody knew it was coming until 2 hours beforehand. It's crazy. It is all about driving the customers themselves, connecting, buzzing, talking, discovering, sharing, creating that hype, that buzz, that just, again, it depends on where you are. A new artist, obviously, is different, but it is. It's all about some way of getting that discovery and that sharing within these sort of peer-to-peer networks. So connect strategies, collaborate strategies, customizing experiences, creating the content. So it's not just the album, the song, but it's the videos, it's the Q&As on Reddit. It's all the things you create besides the music that helps to draw in and feed and support this. Very much focused around this whole sort of networked approach to marketing. The other sort of big trend that I would say about music is that it is very much an omni-channel category at this point. And so to succeed, again, as an artist / label, it's all about succeeding in both, and they reinforce and critically leverage each other in the sort of flywheel sense, the live and the streaming. The streaming is, nobody's making much money on streaming. Even you can be a very successful in terms of reputation and millions of people listening to you, and you're not making enough money off your streaming to literally pay your apartment rent. Streaming pays very little to artists, unless you're really, really at the very, very, very top. I mean, if you're Taylor Swift, you could buy a pretty nice house with your streaming revenues. Even for them, if you are an artist who's blessed enough and successful enough, you get to the point where you are, commercially, making a good amount of revenue for yourself, your label, and so forth. it's going to be about the live experience, the live shows, the merchandise sold to live shows. So that's been a real shift in the industry, where it used to be recording was a major part of the business model in terms of revenue. Live shows were also there. Now recording is more, it's almost primarily a marketing tool. Again, there's some revenue to it, and you want to optimize it, of course, but the weight in terms of how you actually capture the value back as a business model is much more in the live. So it's about getting the two together. And of course, you need one for the other. The live shows drive more interest, and they're part of how people get that passionate connection and stream and share and discover. But you need the streaming presence and everything you're doing and all the online content. You look at the artists who've been most brilliant in this sort of current era, somebody like a Lady Gaga. They're brilliant at this idea of having this whole network of their customers. They're and the idea of fans and relationship to the fans has been part of music culture for many, many years. But the way now that you use all these digital tools and channels to create this deeper and more continuous level of sort of engagement, intimacy, and this feeling of sort of connectedness to the artist is really pretty incredible.
Excellent. Yeah, I thought you just really liked playing the saxophone. I didn't know you had all that music background.
And I play the saxophone.
Yeah. So we have a question here. I'm going to try and tie this in with one that I've been asked quite a few times on the Q&A here, because we always have our B2B questions, but I don't think we didn't get any through here. So we'll combine them, I suppose, segue one into the other. So Paula Pazzotto, so could you please share a case of a company, and she says ideally B2C, a retailer or CPG, FMCG to some markets, that is working well with big data, and explain why. But if we could also cover off a B2B case after that one, that would be really helpful. Double whammy.
So big data, how are companies using data really effectively and powerfully? This is one of the sort of big shifts in terms of marketing and in terms of business models in general today. And so many sort of existing legacy industries that have been around for a long time, as maybe the delivery method and the product and so forth is changing and becoming more digital. One of the fundamental differences is you start to see there's just more data available about customer behaviors, about market dynamics and so forth. And of course, it's talking from the very first question about mind shift. I would say the bigger shift in many cases is not about getting your marketers to think about how do I take a picture for Instagram versus how do I take a picture for a print advertisement. It's how do I think about data as I create pictures and distribute them and see what happens, right? Because it used to be you just sort of took a picture that you used your aesthetic instincts and maybe talked to somebody and picked what was the best one and you sent it out there. Now there's all these data loops. So what are some examples of companies that are making this shift? Let me give three sort of broad sort of categories, because as you said, you want B2C as well as B2B. So consumer packaged good, that was Paula's request. So one example that I know is Coca-Cola. So Coke is a very, very traditional marketing culture until recently. I had a chance to bring to campus at Columbia to talk with me on a panel about data in marketing. One of the guys who was sort of brought in to help start Coke on their shift to becoming a more data-driven marketing operation. And he was brought in from a consulting background, analytics, sort of deep analytics experience at one of the big, management consulting firms. And he obviously been working with Coke, and then he was brought in-house. And he said, look, a lot of people think of this as a technical issue because he gets, speaks at conferences in companies like IBM, where it's like, well, is it on cloud or on premise, or how we set up the technology? He said, look, the hardest part is getting people to change their jobs, getting people who work inside your CPG company, work inside Coke, to think differently about the job. And kind of example, going back to images, he said, is, very classic brand-focused kind of marketing operation. Talented people, they would go and they would work with great skill and passion and create and bring to him the perfect picture of a polar bear holding a can of Coke, right? Because polar bear was the theme that year or that season, and they worked it and made this amazing picture. And he would say, that's great, but can you actually give me 20 pictures of a polar bear with a can of Coke? And they say, yeah, well, sure, I had 100 I went through, but this is the best one. Don't you trust my judgment? I said, no, it's great. I'm glad that probably is the best one. I'm sure you have great instincts, but I want all 20. I want the top 20 because then I'm going to use data. I'm going to go out and test. And this was his point, is that the perfect picture may not be the perfect picture for each customer segment at each particular moment in each context. And so we have to become much more data driven. We have to look and we have to test and experiment. The data is not going to create the picture. You still need those aesthetic sensibilities of in that case, the art director. You've got lots of people with those sorts of skills in Coke. And he said, it's not that we all have to become quants, but we all have, even if your job is the artist, you've got to think in this data way. So think about, what are the things I can create that's going to use data, and how will I take the data that comes back to help inform what I'm doing, even if what you're doing still has a lot of, in that case, a lot of creativity to it. And that was really the key thing he talked about. I mean, they, also, like a lot of CPG brands, are the kind of business that's historically not had much data. And it's not, again, because they're selling through other channels. They have not had the flood of data that other brands have had. So they have more data than they used to, but it's not, oh my gosh, we're swimming in so much data, what could we possibly do with it? So they had to actually think about, well, what are our marketing goals? What are the things we're trying to achieve? What's the data we would like to know to be able to figure out if A is working or B is working, that kind of thing. If this is resonating with these customers versus those customers. What are our gaps in our data? And then how can we get creative about finding data we have already somewhere or bringing in new data with partnerships? And he talked about data partnerships. He talked about finding things like it wasn't a really big part of their marketing, but they had a coupon program. They've been around for years. So they had a club of like 1 million people who were like direct marketing targets, names, addresses, and so forth, which is not how you mostly sell Coke. This is literally from like scratch the label off kind of that. It was like that antiquated a program. Well, of course, they started bringing the loyalty program up to date and adding, digital badges and things like that for different segments. The main thing was they said, look, this is not our whole market, but it gives us a pool of customers where we can do a lot more data testing with, because we can send something out and actually on an addressable basis measure who's responding how. So it's like piecing together what are the data you have, what's the data you can uncover, how you can bring in new data with new partnerships, how can you create new marketing strategies that are partly about, solving a customer problem, delighting the customer, creating a memorable experience, but also partly, if we design it this way, it'll give us some measurable data, right? It can start to feed in a little more data. So that's an example of sort of where the shift for a CPG brand, no data historically, doesn't think in a data-driven way at all, and even in a digital revolution still has somewhat limited data. Then you've got companies, things like B2C companies that are more data rich. It could be banks, it could be telcos, it could be hospitality, for example. These companies have already been fairly data-driven, many of them for years. What's happening now is they're able to use the data in much broader, richer ways and use it to not just sort of after the fact sort of measure what happened, but to even sort of proactively use predictive analytics and shape things like customer experiences. We're talking about hotels, we're talking about airlines. One company I'm well aware of is Caesars. They have casinos in Vegas, but also hotels and restaurants and so forth. So they've been within hospitality, one of the most data-driven companies for years. So they've always, for decades, they've actually been analyzing their customers based on customer lifetime value, right? Using data to create models to figure out what's the value of different customers, and not just transactional. How much are they going to spend at the blackjack table today? But is this a recurring customer? Is this a business traveler who comes to Vegas 3 times a year? And even if they're not making a huge amount of money for us on one visit, it's over the lifespan. This is a really important customer. So they're already doing this. And they had a loyalty program with the old, card that you swipe, and you swipe it when you use the number when you make your reservation, and you use it at the restaurant, you get points. It's the old points loyalty program. That was all there. What's happened, the sort of big shift that's happened in their case, is how they can use the data. So they already have all this data about these customers. They've been addressable and sort of crackable one by one. Now they can do things besides, like, you get home from your trip. I mean, literally, it used to take days or weeks to crunch all the data, and they figure out, how valuable is this customer? What did they do on this trip? Which of our restaurants did they eat in? And now we're going to send them a targeted, customized, mailing. Hey, you've won this many points. Here's some targeted rewards you might redeem it for. Now they can actually use the data in real time while you are on your trip. because that's been the sort of technological breakthrough, is the speed at which they can process this data and figure out things. And literally, they know which blackjack table you're at because you swipe your card to get points. They know how you're playing at the blackjack table. They know if you're a loyal customer and having a terrible night at the blackjack table, that they're not going to rig the cards. They're not going to make you win the next hand, but they want to make you less likely. They're worried about losing you. Well, they can predict and model, is this person at a higher risk of sort of not coming back to us on their next trip? So guess what? You hit them with they had a terrible night of blackjack, but they wake up in the morning and at breakfast they're given free tickets to Cirque du Soleil at the Caesars own, show that day. And all of a sudden they're like, wow, I love Caesars again. That's the kind of way that you're using data in very different ways. And then the third example would be, and there's a lot of companies in this sort of category, a B2B firm, and a lot of sort of industrial firms that I am working with and advising right now. What they're finding is you're getting much more data, and it's often not so much about the customer, it's about your supply chain. It's about the usage of your industrial products. So you're creating a jet aircraft engine. And not only do you now have much more data about every step in manufacturing that jet aircraft engine, which can be really valuable in helping you, again, predictively decide, so that you have the right amount of supplies at each stage, and you overproduce or underproduce and all those sorts of things. But literally after you deliver the aircraft, or if you're a carrier, you deliver the elevator, or lots of companies in this category, you have data and sensors on that machine, that complex equipment, and that is operating, capturing data as it operates. And you can use that to, for one thing, you can create dashboards and tools for your customers. B2B customers now want to have data. They want that data to be in usable fashion. They want to say, hey, give me a tool where I can look at my iPad and I see what's happening, the current state of these multi-million-dollar assets I bought from you, right? That's the expectation. That's what I've been told now. That's like, where's my 2-day delivery, right? If you're in e-commerce, these people buying expensive equipment now, they say, yeah, it's great. It's a best-in-class MRI machine and so forth. But where's my dashboard? Where's my analytics tool? I assume it's going to have that for free. It also opens up even new business models where you can start selling equipment as a service. You say, well, we're going to make an operating expense or a capital expense. You don't buy the equipment. We will lease it to you on performance. And by using this data to optimize the performance, you can actually deliver more value to the customer at lower cost because of using that data to optimize and know when it needs servicing and things like that. So it even changes new ways of creating value. So it's, as you see, it's a bit different depending on the structure of your business. But really, whatever kind of business you're in today, whether the data is new or the tools to use the data is the biggest change, whether it's customer data, whether it's data on your operations. If you are attuned to it, this is going to have a big impact, not only in how you market, not only in terms of your relationship with the customers and solving their problems and meeting their expectations, but even in terms of how you can generate new revenue and new business models.
It just reminded me of another trauma. That week I spent at Caesars last year. Sorry, that's not a place.
Yeah, what went wrong with Caesars?
Yeah.
Didn't get you as a loyal customer.
Yeah, I don't gamble, so I had nothing to do. I did my talk and that was it. Just walked around.
This is good. You can do some good shopping in Vegas or catch some entertaining shows. Yes.
Yeah, there was a Rod Stewart concert on. I could have gone to that.
There you go.
So, going to move on because we've got a good question here around international markets. We don't get this question often, but it's one I know a lot of companies really kind of not necessarily struggle with, but they question it quite a lot. So, from Wei Yin Joanna Liao in the Netherlands, she asks, when we talk about digital marketing strategy, should we have one universal global digital marketing strategy, or should each region or country develop their own strategy? If each region or market has their own strategy, then what is the role of the global marketing team?
Yeah, great. So this is sort of a classic question in marketing that's been around for decades. And the short answer is yes, you need both a global and a local role. And if anything, as you get bigger, local should take the lead, or you should do as much local as you can. And it was sort of a push even more towards that in the last 20 years. Technology is one reason why there's a little bit more coming back now to the global team in terms of its role and its remit. But yeah, all you have to do is look at the biggest sort of global brands, mega brands, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, enterprise brands as well. They all have a global local approach. And literally, if you're talking about consumer goods, they have different products. I mean, the menu is, classic example. The menu is different. It's not the same McDonald's menu in every country. The balance is basically, and this holds absolutely as we're thinking about these digital behaviors and thinking about specifically strategies to leverage them and all the things we've been talking about this course. You'll notice the whole point, again, specifically the whole point of the framework, a behavioral framework, is to help you be as customer-centric as possible. Understand how these digital changes in the market are shaping and enabling and empowering customer behaviors, customer needs, right? Getting close to it. That's the reason why this framework can hopefully be helpful to you. So the local team is always going to have the most customer knowledge, right? They're closest to the customer. They're the ones who are going to know what's particular about the customers in that region versus anywhere else. They're going to understand what's happening in the behaviors. They're going, you don't want somebody in a conference room in New York or Houston or Sao Paulo saying, well, here's our global strategy. We're going to do 20% Instagram and 10% Facebook and 30% Snapchat. That might be perfect for that particular city. I guarantee you, if you look at your global markets, that, like the McDonald's menu, is one of those things that's just going to be different in those different places. So the local, the strength in what you want to still keep with no matter what and reside with the local marketing team is they have the deepest knowledge of the customers, and they have that more tangible sort of granular knowledge of the customer behaviors. Which tools, which channels are they using, which ones are more popular there, which ones are having success, what are the different customer segments which focus on the customer side. So customer intimacy and customer behaviors. What Global can do is some really important things. Best practices and shared learning, right? So one of the critical things is all this is happening, things are moving very fast. What I often find is rather than in global organizations them saying, yeah, it's great, our French team has really figured out, is kind of focused on what works in France, and our Indonesian team is great on using new digital strategies in Indonesia, and our Peruvian team is doing great on sort of Peruvian strategy, digital strategies for Peru. What I typically hear is like, oh yeah, we've got two countries that are doing this well, and everyone else has no idea what they're doing. And it's because we haven't resourced them enough, or we haven't given them training, or there's reasons. It's not that they don't care. And so the first job of Global is sharing best practices. Okay, figure out, who's doing best, who's learned the most, who's gathered the most data and tried different things and had gotten to a stage where they've seen some results. How do you capture that knowledge, share it across the organization? It's really important with global things. And then you're going to have certain shared resources, right? So obviously, bread and butter brand assets, right? So Global has got to figure out where does the brand stay consistent and where is it allowed to be localized, right? And be very clear and sort of set those rules and help maintain that alignment around the brand identity and sort of the voice and so forth. And what is going to be consistent, and how do you, but all of you give a certain amount of local expression as well. Tools, right? Particularly as we're getting into digital, this is maybe literally technologies you're buying or owning or developing. It also would go into partners, right? So you're going to get more out of your relationship with, a Google or a Facebook or somebody if every single country isn't only doing it. I mean, certain things probably are going to be done on a local level with Google or Facebook in that country. But you also want to sort of bring together the total budget and be able to use that to say, hey, we want some support or some data or something from you because look what we're doing globally, right? So you want to be able to leverage those sort of relationships with outside providers and vendors at a global level. You want to be able to sort of test and try tools, and that becomes sort of another form of best practice. Build things in-house. Certainly you don't want, and this happens, that you're sort of recreating the work of testing and learning which tool or vendor works, as well as even building your own technologies or solutions in different places. You want to avoid that redundancy. That's something that Global does really well. And lastly, there's certain fundamentals of the marketing strategy, things like, your product development probably going to be, depending on the kind of product you have, a significant degree is global or maybe entirely global. Again, if it's food, you're going to have the Big Mac is the same, but a lot of other things change. Other companies, depending on the products you make, your product portfolio may be identical. You just have one product portfolio. You may sell more of certain things in different markets. So that's going to be driven at a global level, developed at a global level with input from the local. So the two have to work together. It's about not, it's about having a partnership, not sort of being in conflict with each other. And it's about knowing sort of the strengths and the thing that each one is sort of best at, and sort of playing, each sort of playing to your strengths and focusing on contributing the things that you sort of do best, again, between local versus global.
I think that's hugely important. That idea of having that balance between the two, where both are contributing something rather than that. It tends to be, and it's not even just from global down to market level. It's within markets. Are the US and the UK almost to markets because they're bigger, they've got more budget, or kind of explaining to a market that they should be doing all these huge campaigns, and that, well, you guys have 15% of the budget each, we get 3%. Because I spent a few days with a global insurance company, and just speaking at their event recently, and the whole theme was actually basically, how do we stop spending so much of our money on Google? How do we stop giving them 80 cents of every dollar? And that was a global problem, no matter your size of your, they all had the same problem. And part of it was about kind of a global deal, trying to use some of their clout to get something a little bit extra off them. But it was, strategic. And then it's a big question, but then everyone takes it back. And, the guys in France are discussing it with the Lithuanian team, and they're bringing something new. So I quite like their approach to it, because it wasn't just, here's a roadshow of some markets that are best in class, It tends to get people's backs up a little bit. So on that note, I'm going to move to the question we have on search marketing, because we've got one on influencers after that, and we can bring in the elements of question 10 on that one. So a question from Abdulaziz Al-Saibai, and he asks, I don't think Google ads are as effective as they used to be, right on topic, and are almost not worth the investment with perhaps to video on YouTube, which is given the option, not given the option to skip anymore. Some of the ads are skippable, some aren't. Is it better investing in social media, say on Instagram? My question is really, are Google ads still a priority in today's digital marketing, or is it losing its appeal?
Good question. So let's start by, what do we mean by Google ads? So typically when we talk about Google ads, we mean AdWords. We mean paid search results, sponsored search results. You type in the search and the first few results say sponsored, and the company wants to be there, right? The reality is those are very expensive. It's rare that I hear anyone say, oh, I'm getting such a great deal on my Google AdWords, right? It's just not something you hear anymore. It's a law of supply and demand. So the interesting thing about search advertising in the sort of classic format is that it tends to be very effective among advertising, and the impact is strong because you are dealing with a customer who is at a point of significant intent. Now, they may or may not be ready to buy, but they're at least sort of down the funnel where they're sort of actively researching, thinking about a decision-making process. So you've got them at a really right point, and because you've got their intent captured in their search terms, you have a lot of insight of sort of what specifically they are most ready to sort of consider and be brought to a discussion with. So it's brilliant. It's sort of genius in that sense. It's like a great opportunity for marketing. But the flip side is its limited supply. Unlike things like banner ads and so many other kinds of things where you can create more and you can publish more and create videos and so forth, you can't force somebody to do a search, right? And if you did, it would lose all its value, because the whole point is it wouldn't be measuring intent. Like if you paid people to do searches, well, yeah, you would increase the volume. Google could say, oh, let's create more. We have then more ads we can sell. But the ads would perform less well because the people would just be typing in the searches to earn the 5 cents or whatever. So you've got this valuable marketing tool, and you've got this limited supply. So what's going to happen? The price is going to rise as people use it more and more and see, oh, this is effective. They're going to bid up the prices. And of course, they created a bidding-based business model because that was, the best way to optimize it. So yes, that's sort of the nature of the beast. And what that means is if you use search effectively, you should definitely be able to get some customer impact, get customers there. But you have to be very careful to make sure you're not losing money on it. Cost per acquisition and figuring out what's the lifetime value. Maybe you don't make it back in the first purchase, but can it be justified? You measure that actually people then continue without the search to buy from your transaction, and therefore it's worth it. So you want to be very careful about that. That is Google's search, AdWords. Google is a lot of other things, as Abdulaziz touched on in a couple points, and saying, what about YouTube and video ads? Yes, YouTube is very different. It's a more brand-focused medium, although it's much more trackable than a lot of others, much more data targetable, and does have options even for direct marketing for a stimulus response versus something like a television. So it's a very interesting tool. There are different types of YouTube formats. Skippable is in many cases great. It's actually a plus for you. A lot of marketers sort of instinctively think, oh, they can skip my ad, that's a bad thing. But you don't pay if they skip your ad. So it's actually a great thing because it allows you to test different creative, test different content, see which ones resonate enough that people are willing to watch it voluntarily and not spend money on the disengaged audience you put your ad in front of. That being said, there are also times where it is valuable to have the unskippable. One of the things YouTube now has in formats are very short. They call them bumper ads. They're, I think, 6 seconds. And that can't be skipped. Having talked with people who work in YouTube, their sort of best practice is combining them. You have a longer ad that sort of tells a story and spells out, the value proposition and so forth. And then you have these short little ads that just sort of reinforce key points. And that if actually the same person sees both, that's where you start to see actual impact, more impact on customer behavior. The key point here is that if you're working with Google, I would very much encourage you to think about using the different parts together. You're most likely to get an actual ROI, to get an actual more value out than you're spending on them if you're thinking about how do we use search, how do we use long-form video, how do we use organic video that people discover as a suggested versus pre-roll advertising video, which is going to be shorter and they could skip, versus the bumpers. Use these different sort of formats. They also have a whole display ad network. You're probably doing some kind of display ads. And the key thing is Google has data across all of this. Oh, and they have Android, and so they have an ad network there. So using the data and being able to, and this, how you can do it is constantly evolving. So you talk with Googlers, but you can use data to target from one to the other. Right? So you can say, I want to show this YouTube video to people who have searched on this search term, or who have clicked on my search ad previously. Or I want to only show this short YouTube video that they can't skip to people who have willingly watched the 30-second YouTube video within the last 2 weeks. Because then you are going to get that reinforcement benefit. Right? If you just show the 6-second one, nobody ever saw the full story, they're going to be like, what was that? It's not going to work. So using the data across the different tools, I want to target the people who responded to the display ad, or people who watched the video. I then want to pay to show the display ads to them on other websites. That's where you are more likely to be able to, again, you're going to test it. You got to set your marketing objectives, define your measurable metrics, see what works, what's paying off, what's not. But I think you're going to, over time, be more likely to find that those Google investments are paying off your business if you're thinking about these different Google properties, not in isolation, but thinking how they work together and thinking about the data they have to connect them that allow you to target people using these different tools to help target each other in a sense.
Yeah, and the part Google is having a bit more trouble with is around those other areas outside of the strict AdWords as we would typically know it, because it's just such a finely tuned machine for taking that demand and matching it up with the supply, and you know exactly what you're getting in return. So if your return on investment dips below a certain amount, well then you just don't invest in it anymore. You have a threshold where you're making the right margin off it and you can just stop, and it has played into that mindset better than anything out there. They've struggled a little bit more with things like display.
And you want to compare, exactly as you're saying, make the decision based on performance. And you may find your particular business with the outcomes you're trying to drive and the messaging you have, you say, hey, look, I can do my display ads on Google. I can my display ads with Ad Network XYZ. Google has better data and they have all these features and I'm able to use the search and da-da-da. But guess what? It actually costs more per display ad. And when I actually run it and perform, I discover my less targeted ads on Ad Network XYZ actually sell more units per dollar spent because, I don't have to pay as much for them. So make the decision based on the metrics, not
Absolutely.
based on the branding.
I'm going to go to the next question, actually, which is, I think, a really good one, and we had something similar has come up in the kind of live Q&A from Mazhar Salam, and it's around branding in the digital space, and it's something that strangely a lot of people have only really started considering a lot recently, and quite separate, brand and digital. It's a bit odd, but definitely merged. There's multiple players in the same category targeting the same audience with almost similar products, similar price point. We'll end up having a similar digital marketing strategy. Isn't each brand's own positioning the only way to have a differentiated strategy? So how do you integrate that brand essence into the digital arena? It's so focused on acquisition prices and so on.
Yeah. So brand is essential. It's just as important today as it's been in marketing at any prior point, and it's a little different in terms of, I guess the sort of biggest shift I would say in terms of how we think about brands and brand building is that in the real sort of classic broadcast marketing era, the brand was really, for a lot of companies, seen as something that you projected, right? It was an image that you would sort of project into the minds of the customer. Now, the great writers about branding have always said, even back in the 90s, brand is not actually the image you're projecting out. It's what actually resides in the mind of the customer, right? Which maybe you're successful and they hold in their head exactly what you hope they would, but there are a lot of other factors that's going to shape their association. So when they think of the name of the brand, what are all those connections and emotions and associations? That's sort of what the brand is. Now, that's much clearer today in the digital era because, as we talk about, this is one of these key points of the idea of thinking about customer networks, is the brand is being shaped by the whole network. So you are not, now you may be the biggest, well, hopefully, single influencer of your brand. You're doing the most, investing the most in sort of trying to help define it, and shape it, and support it, and bring it to life. But customers' interactions with each other and all these other digital tools and platforms for discovery and search and sharing and creating content and so forth, they're all also shaping the brand. So you realize very much that it's a little more of a dynamic. You are the steward of your brand, I would say. You are helping, you define what you think it can be and should be and hope to be, and then you help to not only take your own actions to bring that to life, but also to sort of encourage and catalyze and think about how do you get customers to do the things that help bring that brand to life. Now, in terms of how does the sort of starting part of this question, how does this relate to positioning, and specifically if you're in a category where they're very similar products, is it brand sort of the key to differentiation? Yes, absolutely. So that hasn't changed. If you're in a situation where your product and others are, here's a product category I consume regularly. So sparkling water. Right. So La Croix has been around for a while, but has sort of grown quite a bit in popularity and availability in the last couple of years. It's a canned sparkling water, flavors, natural flavors added, no sugar, no artificial sweeteners. So for me, that's a product category that I like a lot. Discovered it. Guess what? Somebody launched another brand just recently. If you watch the Super Bowl, you saw it in the last Super Bowl, Bubbly. It's spelled like bubbly with missing a B. So a single B-U-B rather than B-U-B-B. Bubbly, and, same thing. Sparkling water, natural flavors, kind of fruity flavors, no sugar, etc. Now, the flavors are a little different, right? Of course, you want to do that. You want to eke out every bit of product differentiation you can. I mean, they're not wildly different, but one has grapefruit, the other has raspberry. So that's great. And maybe you're going to find, my son particularly likes the cherry flavor of the the Bubbly, and there's not a really cherry equivalent for La Croix, but part of it is branding. Absolutely. What does the box look like? What does the can look like? What's the, what are the images you create in the marketplace? It's the classic sort of highly brand-driven sort of category. When you think about your digital marketing strategy, this is, you may remember when I started, I said, how do you think about sort of the steps? How do you sort of put this together? Start with the marketing goals. I'm trying to get, people in New Jersey to try my sparkling water, whatever. I'm in Bangalore and I'm trying to sell my professional services to European firms, whatever the goal is. Start with that, that goal, figure out which customer segments you're going after, and define that brand positioning. Absolutely, that's going to be one of the key levers you have for differentiation. And then when you get to that stage of access strategy, engage strategy, customize, collaborate, connect, how do these all go together? Use the brand as a lens just as much as you use the customer. So it's got to be leveraging, if it's a customized experience, it's got to be customized that's relevant to that particular type of customer, but it also has to be relevant to to your brand. In a way, ideally, that sort of, it's a better fit for your brand than doing the exact same thing would be for that other brand that has a similar product but has a somewhat different brand identity or positioning. Just one example of a company where I remember a specific story of them doing this with a digital strategy. So it was Nike, of course, great global consumer brand. They've been doing stuff in digital from early on, great at sort of experimenting, trying things quickly, learning from the market, being willing to shift strategy, being sort of a leader, not a follower. So I've had some speakers both from Nike and from Nike's agencies over the years, and actually students, executives in some of my programs as well. One of the most interesting ones was a story told to me by someone who worked on a particular digital marketing strategy program for Nike. And this was when apps were really taking off and sort of becoming the whole thing, the idea of brands creating apps, and not just an app to sort of buy the product, but create an experience through an app, right, that would come from a brand. This was like, wow, this is going to become a brand experience. So Nike was one of the first to start thinking about this. And they were thinking about customer segments. And one of the things, and their idea was, to be, a deeper enmeshed in part of the sort of whole lifestyle of their customer. It was kind of a marketing strategy for the brand. And then they had a particular segment, and this was in Europe. The manager was based in Italy, as I recall. And he said, we were going after a certain segment that travels a lot in European cities and is younger and wants to sort of have, new experiences. So they came up with this idea, well, you could create, this is at the time kind of new for the app world, a sort of curated travel app that would sort of tell you, and you're going to Prague or going to Frankfurt, wherever you are, like what's the cool, interesting things happening, and sort of an insider's voice from locals on the ground, not the sort of classic things that you would find in a travel guide. And they came up with, they had a great design for it. They figured out what the voice was going to be. They started recruiting like DJs and up and coming chefs and like interesting people in each of these cities who sort of knew their domain of like, great nightclubs, but also had opinions about great restaurants and vice versa, that kind of thing. And it was really coming together and it was testing really well, but they actually killed the project. And what he told me was they were moving along and they were getting good response, and the prototypes were looking really good. But then they had to step back and they did the brand sort of gut check. And they thought about it, and the more they discussed it, they concluded that it was a good experience, it was a good digital experience, it was valuable to their customer segment who they wanted to reach, but it was not a close enough fit with their brand. It didn't feel wrong. It wasn't like, ooh, Nike shouldn't do this, but they didn't feel ownership. They said there's no real reason why Nike should be doing this and not several other sort of cool lifestyle brands. It just didn't feel, they didn't sort of have a unique ownership to it. And so they ultimately said, somebody should do this, but we don't think it's a high enough priority for us. We're gonna cancel this project, move the team on to some other ideas. So I think it's really important to have that willingness to sort of say, look, brand is going to be one of the key lenses when we think about, is this creating a digital experience that is relevant to, solves the needs of, or delights the right customer segment for us, we think will support our marketing objective, but also, is it something that is in line with our brand and what it means to these customers? And whether you're looking at brands like Nike or Starbucks or B2B brands like SAP. Time and again, I've seen companies like this. They do take that step to use the brand as that sort of filter and decide there's always great ideas out there, but which of our ideas for digital marketing strategies are we gonna pursue and move forward on?
Excellent. Well, we just about have time to wrap up with our next steps questions. We'll bundle these two together. So Amit asked, what's the best course to take as a follow-up to this one? And Joan had asked earlier as well, what book should we read to build our digital marketing knowledge?
Well, in terms of courses, there's, if you're interested, I mentioned another course on with Emeritus, like another Cohen Business School Emeritus partnership. It's on digital business strategies. So back to that question of sort of how marketing strategy relates to business strategy. This is sort of on that level of how do we think about the overall strategy for the business in the digital era? How do our principles of how we relate to customers, how we relate to competitors, how we manage innovation, how do we define our value proposition, how do we use data? We talked about in relation to my question. Those sorts of questions in terms of defining business strategy and how do we evolve and transform our businesses. So if that's of interest, again, it's a little bit of a different lens, stepping back, not specifically marketing, although marketing and customer strategy is one of the elements of it. I would definitely encourage folks to check that out. There's some other great classes on Emeritus. We actually have one that's a bundle. If you've taken this class, you take my second class, and there's another great class from MIT. And it's the postgraduate diploma in digital business. There's some other new ones coming on from sort of a more engineering background. I think it's machine learning or AI. So I'd encourage those. Definitely look for other classes. In terms of books, I'm actually working right now. I'm in the throes of my writing my next book right now, and so hoping to have that out next year. My last was called the Digital Transformation Playbook. This is going to be sort of a follow-up to that, looking at leading change in legacy organizations and how do you drive transformation in the real world. And I tend to post pretty regularly on social media, particularly LinkedIn is my currently sort of my favorite. So if you're interested, I would say follow me on LinkedIn. I'll post my profile there, and I try to post most of the year, at least once a week, something interesting that I'm reading, whether it's on marketing, brands, business strategy. I just read something really fascinating a couple of days ago that I'm probably going to share that's on the early history of e-commerce. So what happened in the sort of first few years of the e-commerce revolution, the things that were exciting, the things that didn't pan out or completely too early, and therefore a lot of companies went bust. And the sort of issues that came up at the beginning that wound up setting the stage for both the ultimate success of e-commerce and why it's now a growing and thriving part of the economy, but also some of the issues around data and privacy and sovereignty of different countries, and a lot of issues that are now coming back in different ways that we have to grapple with. So that's the kind of thing I usually like to share. There are lots of great, if you're just looking for great resources to sort of see what's the latest news, what's happening sort of week to week, a few of the newsletters I would highly recommend. A Wall Street Journal has a couple. There's their CIO, Chief Information Officer newsletter, which is not as wonky as you might think from the title. It's not really just for people who are in the weeds of the tech. It's really more from a business point of view. They also have a Forbes Says the CMO forum. Actually, Wall Street Journal has a great CMO-focused newsletter as well, which is a lot about media as well as advertising. That's kind of their focus. So those two are great. Quartz is a great publication that's just sort of a daily email newsletter that's a roundup of sort of business news with a strong digital angle. Marketing is certainly part of it. The nice thing about Quartz is, and the journal does this a little bit too, they don't only highlight their own articles, and they pick their best, their favorites of the day from many, and not just sort of the big, oh, that was a great article in the New York Times or the Atlantic. They also read really obscure blogs, and occasionally you'll see, some, interesting article uncovered on this publication you've never heard of. So those are sort of great week-to-week tools. But my main advice is just keep learning. One of the things why I enjoy executive education so much is because I'm such a believer in lifelong learning. Certainly, if you think about your careers, clearly we're in a world today where it is not about you do your education and then you find your company and then you sort of follow a career track at that company. We're all moving much more of a zigzag through our careers in different kinds of roles and different jobs. Who knows? Maybe you started as a jazz saxophonist 30 years ago, and suddenly you wake up and you're a business professor at Columbia Business School. Not suddenly overnight, but we have to keep learning. Even if you are staying in the same job, even if it's your company that you created and you're going to stay with it for the next 10 years, you have to keep learning. And whether it's something that's big and formal and structured, like an online class like this, or even an in-person class at a campus like Columbia's, or it's that sort of day-to-day learning and keeping the centers out. The last part I would say is from people. Keep building that network of folks you know. I hope this course, I know for many people, is part of how you build that. Connections you've made, people you've had in discussions and classwork with who are working maybe in a different industry, but similar stage in their career, or in your industry, but in a different part of the world. These are great resources. Keep in touch with them. You can be a source of peer learning. What are you reading? What are you seeing? What's the event you just went to? What was a great talk you just found on YouTube? Keep sharing that with each other. That's sort of another key pillar of continuing to learn. I guess that's my advice.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much on behalf of everyone. I can see there's some good discussion going on. People suggesting a few things in there. So we'll wrap things up there. We've overrun just a little bit, but I'm sure you'll forgive us. And we'll follow up via email. There are some questions I know we didn't get to answer. We had to prioritize the ones we got in advance, but we will get you responses on those anyway. So yeah, thanks very much to you, David. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you to Clark, and thank you to the whole team at Emeritus for all the work you do keeping this program running and really attending and engaging all of the folks who are in the program. And a big thank you to everyone who's in the program. Thank you for being a part of it and all the energy, the great questions you sent in, and thanks for being a part of it.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. Please take the little feedback form after. We always like to hear from you. And yeah, please keep in touch via LinkedIn, via Canvas. And I'll look forward to speaking to you all very soon. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.